David awoke to the sounds of shaking and clinking of items on a tray. As he slightly opened one eye, he could see a Lithrani medical assistant, slowly and nervously moving towards his bed, her ears pinned back with fear, and her hand shook against her self-control. David continued to feign slumber. No need to terrify her, just leave her to her task. She would leave soon anyway. He closed his eye, going to mindscape of his design, but his attempt was cut. The sound had stopped. A light weight on his legs, and now a slight wash of air caressed his face. It was fast at first, yet grew slower. He was sure it was the Lithrani. His curiosity pushing to the forefront, he opened his eyes just enough to see while seeming asleep. Just in front of his face he saw her rabbit-like nose exhaling air, a nervous twitch at her upper lips, her eyes intently studying his features, her scales a slowly shifting color of blues and greens, each one sliding as she gazed at him. As David wrestled with his thoughts, torn between scaring her or pretending to continue sleeping, beneath both a driving force, a sudden and forceful sound echoed into the room. His ear inferred the direction it came from, and his body moved on instinct alone. His arms shot around the Lithrani, pulling her to him, his feet pushing them away from the door, scattering the tray and its contents, his momentum carrying her with him as he ducked behind the bed, his hands cradling her head and lower back, all while he spun, placing himself between her and the source. His head shot up as they landed, intently snapping to the door only to see two more medical assistants, both Lithrani males. Looks of petrified terror blanketed their faces, with now popped balloons in their hands. His mind slowly noted the lack of danger. He turned back to the Lithrani in his arms, her body frozen, hands clasped in silent prayer. Her nose now twitched with an immense speed, a look of dread haunting her visage, her eyes pleading for this to end, one way or the other. Yet David had one thought and thought alone. Shit, shitty shit, fuck! Whatever force that guided him was gone, replaced by unease at his actions. He slowly rose, his hands still holding her eyes locked on him like she was quantifying her chances, her likelihood for survival. But he carefully sat her on the bed, his hands releasing her, his form stepping back and hands raised to an apologetic stance, his gaze affixed to her. "I am sorry, I did that by instinct," he said with a tone that was as reassuringly warm as it was steady. I couldn't see what was happening, his posture pushing in on itself in an attempt to seem smaller. "I thought we were in danger." He slowly lowered to a knee. "I didn't hurt you, did I?" The Lithrani watched him, her gaze shifted as she heard, ears coming forward and breathing slowing down, her stiff demeanor carefully breaking. Her eye gently gave way to acceptance, then mirth as she started laughing. "It is Zia Liu's fault," she said, her body jolting with her laughter. "Zia Liu was told who you are by Missan Henri." She placed her hands on the bed to stabilize as she leaned back, and her mirth got louder. "Missan Henri said you are a great example of your kind." Her hands gave up, and she collapsed into the bedding, her jovial bouts broken by a need for air. "Zia Liu was too close, and your strength was scary," her eyes watering at the interaction. "But you were like a gentle giant." She let out a cough as she righted herself. "Zia Liu was scared more because of the sudden movement. But now, Zia Liu, know you are the most caring of Death Worlders Zia Liu has met." She turned to face him with a smile. "I am sorry, but now you know for next time," David said as he felt assured she was fine. He stood back up and turned his attention to the two at the door. Their faces still show fear, but there was uncertainty. David inhaled deeply and cleared his throat. "Can I have a word?" His voice was stern as they seized up. Noticing them not moving, David approached. "I am a fan of pranks and games. It is another matter when it comes to my kind or other Death Worlders," he said as he closed the distance, stopping just outside his arm's reach. "If I have been a Kamoi, I may have attacked her." He raised a knife hand to them and emphasized his next words with sharp chops. "Do not play games around sleeping or unconscious Death Worlders, especially predatory ones. We clear?" They quickly nodded. Their expression told him they wouldn't forget this moment. David turned to the spilled contents of his breakfast and frowned. He felt all the eyes settling on him, and he inhaled hard before facing Zia Liu. "It seems I have ruined the results of your battle. I am sorry," David said with an apologetic tone. "Could I get a new tray from somewhere?" He gestured at the food that had dispersed about the floor. Zia Liu followed his direction, and a look of embarrassment filtered into her eyes. "Yes, the cart outside," she said as she shifted to the door. "Kinar, please give him an omnivore meal." David turned to see the male Lithrani rush to a cart and retrieve a new tray. His hands shook as he then approached David. "Thank you, Kinar." He took the food with a hand and walked to the bed. "I would like to eat alone, and I am sure you still have work to do," David said as he got closer to Zia Liu. "Yes," she said, still a bit stunned at the rapid shifting of his moods. "Please excuse Zia Liu," she said as she hopped off the bed and walked out, taking her company with her. David looked down at his tray of food. A subconscious desire to gorge himself bubbled to the surface. The motives behind his movements truer. His mind told him to protect, but his actions were that of a predator guarding its meal. A haunting thought. "Why am I so hungry?" he whispered to himself. He grabbed a piece of Zynmar fruit and ate it. The rich flavor, like oranges, yet sweeter, filled his mouth as he got back into bed. More questions for Angela when she comes. Her skills are only capped by her station, so he should trust her. Most of the day went by uneventfully. Zia Liu came back and apologized along with her co-workers and their respective liaison officer, which led to a long discussion about why he acted the way he did, which ended with them accepting that every human may act differently. Some of his team eventually did find time to pop by to visit and bring him more food, which he appreciated even. Though his meals felt heavy, he felt ravenously hungry. And even Cole showed up, evidence of his improvement showing as he went over the ritual. Finally, the day drew to a close, and one of the two people he had wished to see arrived. As Alaris walked in, her movement stopped after the door, it closing behind her, a stunned haze settling in her demeanor. Proof of a long day evident in her form, the sagging at the shoulder, a lull in her eyes, her fur matted and unkempt. Yet as their eyes met, her joy at seeing him bounded forth, contented smile at the corners of her face, her hands reached for him, a request he gave in kind, a soft and happy growl at their embrace. "How has your day been?" he asked as they pulled away a bit. His hands carefully glided on her back with a calming intent behind them. "I told my pack your request." Her gaze slowly shifted to worry. "They aren't sure why I allowed it. None of them, save for myself and Kiga, think you can win," her hands pressing a bit tighter on his shoulders. "I also told them about your place at my side." Her voice cracked a bit. "They think I'm being foolish and heat-struck. A few have called a challenge." Her tail stopped its movements, her shoulders dropped a bit, and her ears fell. "I don't know what to do, David, and it scares me," she said as she turned away, but not letting go. David moved to stand, his hands not leaving her. As he shifted, his attentive look focused on her. "Tell them that any that wish to challenge can only do so after the trial," he said, as he pulled her in after getting to his feet. His voice carried a certainty of his actions. "They will find out why I am yours, and they will see your wisdom." His hand gliding into her hair, focusing her on him. "I am your Kusifane, and I wouldn't allow them to challenge your rule." "Fandra David," she said with a chuckle as she buried her face against his chest. Her tail started to move, her mind pushing something else up. "Oh, Kiga wants to see if Cole is ready. She said something about a practice." Alaris's brow furrowed. Whatever her daughter said was a human idea. I didn't understand what she meant by doing the ritual without doing it. "A rehearsal?" David said out loud. "I think that's a great idea." His enthusiasm halted by the confusion of Alaris. "Oh, basically we would go over the ritual, you know. All the words and how he needs to act, make sure he is ready." His explanation acutely useful to Alaris. Her eyes shifted with understanding. "We only have 2 days left," she said, her gaze one of thoughtful contemplation. "It would allow us to see if he can do it." Her hands shifted down to his chest. "With the pack the way it is now, it would be good to have it done right." Her nose exhaling a bit harder, "even if it's untraditional, especially with you in the picture." Her hands gripping a bit at his shirt as she looked away. "But I know Kiga wants Cole to be in it." "Okay, how about tomorrow in a briefing room?" David's hands gingerly lifted her out of her current posture. "We can all see how he's doing. I told him he would be evaluated anyway." "That sounds good," she answered. Her gaze focused on him again. This time, a joyous melody played as she watched his eyes. An unspoken conversation raced between them both, the attraction drawing them closer, their lips inches apart. Yet the fates were cruel, as a request to enter came at the door, snapping any deepening tension as it did. Alaris let a restrained snort escape, and David shook his head as they released each other and created space between them. "Come in!" David called to the door. Angela stepped in. She looked tired, and the bags under her eyes showed a day's worth of work. She was dressed in the security uniform, but had a lab coat over it, holding on to a tablet. "Good, you are awake," she said as she walked up to David, not even glancing at Alaris, her hand soon pressing at the still bandaged wound. "How are you feeling?" "I am fine, a bit sleepy and stupidly hungry," David said back. "That's to be expected," she said as she fetched a bio-reader from her pocket, her eyes watching the tablet as she scanned him. "Well, I have good news, bad news, and terrible news." Her brow furrowed at the results of her scan. "Which do you want?" "Well, the terrible first, please, and end with the good," David said sheepishly. "The poison was parasitic, one our immune systems aren't used to. The secretions have been what caused the damage. Your body is now a breeding ground. You will feel weaker and you will be hungry more often. The parasites are actively sapping your strength. Your body fat had reached 0 a night ago, and your body is trying to fight it. They are starving you, even with the 3 high-calorie meals you had, plus snacks did nearly nothing. At the rate they are going, we believe you have about 5 more days," she exhaled, her eyes still reading the tablet. "Bad news is that we have a treatment that would purge the buggers, but it's experimental at best and will be unbearably painful to anyone. The captain and Duchess attempted to stop us from going to prepare it. They were afraid that it would kill you, but that would be certain without it." Angela's face didn't shift away from the information for a bit before raising her tablet for them to read. "We are going to bombard your body with solar energy. The parasites are highly sensitive to light, like direct sunlight would burn them. We are hoping that fully exposing you, including your insides, to UV light, it will kill them all and allow the immune system to flush them out." She explained carefully. "We are ready now. It took us a day to get the added power draw approved and to form a map for the microfiber lights to follow, but it is your decision. The treatment may kill you. The good news is that our aggressive biological need to survive has mutated your body. You are still human overall." She looked at him then to Alaris and smiled. "However, your underlining code is now compatible with the poison's biosphere. No more fun for you too, unless you want to have a kid. Something new for you guys to think about." "Wait, what?" David said, his body falling onto his bed, forced to seat from his settling weight. "Yep, you and she can theoretically conceive a child. We aren't exactly sure what they will be or how long the term would last or even if it would be healthy, but you, David Solomon, could be the Adam of a new race to the galaxy," Angela said, either not caring about his thoughts or his plans. "But you need to keep your hands to yourselves until we can clear out the parasites in you," she added. Alaris and David looked at her, each slowly understanding what she said. David swallowed hard, his face showing concern at the prospect of being a father, never mind the treatment. While Alaris was joyful at the idea of bearing him a child, his title no longer a hollow one, her belief and faith in his monstrous constitution solid. David leaned on his knees, elbows digging in, the sinking feeling forming at his core, his eyes trying in vain to find something more interesting on the polished floor, only to have a blurred reflection looking at him. His mind started running. He wasn't sure what he should do. He loves her, his vixen from the twilit world, but he was on the path of the damned. Could he do that to her or his child? David's eyes forced themselves shut, tears forming at thoughts that gnawed at him. He pulled his hands over his head with interlacing fingers. His mother raised him alone, and it was hard for her. Even with the support of her culture and community, Alaris would have no one, and even Kiga may abandon her, their union already an untraditional one. Can I get a minute with Alaris?" David asked, his hand carefully held together, his head down as 1,000 fears still chased his mind. He knew that in her culture, the siring of a child is also a cementing of their bond, a proof of his allegiance and her trust. "Sure, I'll go check on what is going on," Angela answered. "The room is the 3rd door on the right if you want to come at your own pace," as she walked out. Alaris turned to face him as the medic left, yet his mind still ran, cold calculations for actions taking hold. He wants to give her that, but should he? Or should he stop? Bring all he had given her to an end? Break her more due to fear? A gentle hand rested on the back of his neck, soft pads caressing his skin, their touch soothingly warm, its owner slowly lowering, as another felt his shoulder, keeping them steady so as not to fall. "My Kusifan?" Alaris asked, her desire to comfort him clear in her voice. "What is the matter?" She reached to David's face, lifting it slowly, her eyes lidden with love and care, true compassion for him staring at him. "Alaris, He stopped. What right was his? He is hesitant because of his mission, one he can't abandon. His voice hitched to the back of his throat. He wants to give her everything, anything she wanted, yet this is too much. He lost himself. His heart burned and mind warred. This was all she would wish of him, yet it would tear his soul apart. He would never see his child, and will never be able to hold them. His eyes now carving for silence at the storm of his mind, a desperate plea of mercy, for solace from the inferno that plagues his heart. "I understand," she said, his mind now clear to her, his eyes conveying all his fears. "I will wait until you are ready." She raised herself, drawing closer to him. She could feel the subtle shaking. "I wouldn't place this too on your shoulder lest you are ready and willing." She pulled him in, his forehead resting on her core, his one weakness laid bare before her, a pain pierced at her heart at his conflict, one she could not quell. His hands wrapping around, pulling himself in, a force stronger than she had felt, a flow of tears soaking her jacket. All she could do now was soothe him. For the first time since childhood, he wept, his desires battling in him, the famishment at his core opening the gates. Emotions once held at bay and bottled now burned him with righteous indignation, a battle for his next actions, a demand to see the mission done, a want to remain at his Zanno's side, a desire to give a new life a future he never had, pressure to protect everyone from the monsters his homeworld can produce, and, above all, a call to survive and live. His eyes grew sore, his mind not accepting any option, but not rejecting any either. He pulled away, his eyes red and his throat burned at the display. He had borne his heart before her, and she remained, tending to his pain, her affection soothing to his heart. He met her gaze, her eyes asking him how he fares, a clear worry, one he can't help but love. So he nods and rises to his feet, lifting her as he does, his choice made, one with which he can plan for. "I am sorry," David said, his visage that of a man torn but not broken, his plans ready to meet reality. "Alaris, if you ask it of me, I will give you all I have and see to it you will never be wanting," his voice imparting a promise of care. Her hands lowered to his chest and her voice low. "Then come and deal with that which ails you, and we will talk after," she says with a gentle kiss on his forehead. "My monstrous Kusifane." David laid down on the operation table, the chill of this room pressing on him, but he was calm as he could be. His gaze shifted about the room, looking for something or someone as 1,000 microfibers cut lines, pushing to deep parts of his being, the pain kept away by chemicals they pump as the lights grow in power. He saw the window to a control room. Behind it stood Angela, overseeing some medical personnel. She seemed nervous, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, jaw clenched unless to speak, her eyes intently watching him. While the lights burn brighter and his body glows, but his eyes soon wandered to the figure next to her, the Zandradane Noe, the hollowed huntress and mother, his Zanno, his wife. Her eyes watching him, a deep well of love, one he loses himself in. Her arms hugging her, an effort to comfort herself as she watches her Kusifane, her heart's holder, her husband, the one to have hold of her, and the ordeal he has to take. His vision was blurred by the energy his ails need to free him. David's hand draws to her, fingers apart, an open invite to hold her, one she returns against a window. Their eyes met, and she sees his thoughts, his readiness, and his willingness. She only nodded a message sent and received. He watches her until the light in the room grows brighter than he can stand, and the pain is too much for his sight to focus in. his mind grasping at thoughts, fighting against the pain, his psyche summoning images, 1,000 dreams and nightmares, each passing him, but a few remain. He sees her, his love in his arms, the sight of her but a few days ago, the beauty she owns. His body is a nuclear inferno, and as more energy is dumped, he can't help but push, an effort to free himself, one in vain. His eyes water at the agony as his form reaches closer to the true light, unsuppressed by his exterior, his throat making his torment audible. He hears a thud, his mind latching to the direction. It is her, calling for him to stay as new images race. Him standing with her and a baby in his arms, her pregnant form resting against him, the mixture of them both in the form of a child smiling like his mother. His desire manifest in his mind, a final image as the pain overwhelms. The room is now gone, light burning waylight, none can see him. And then it all fades. As he collapses on the table, 1,000 microfibers pulling out from points on his skin, his form letting off steam, his lips cracked and eyes open but hollow, as though his soul had burned away, a dreaded mockery of him. Angela rushed in, her hands finding his arm, only to recoil at the heat. She turns to face Alaris for a second, before looking to the medical staff and yells, "Get as much saline as you can along with ice packs and a reviver unit." She musters in an authoritative tone, "Now!"